Hello, and welcome to the 18 Group's webinar entitled Designing for the Future, How to Simplify and Modernize Data Architecture to Unleash Data Value and Innovation. I'm Joy McKnight. I'm an editorial contributor at the 18 Group, and we'll be moderating the webinar today. Before we get started on our discussion, here's a few upcoming A-Team Insight events that might be of interest to you. The first is the AI in Capital Markets Summit in London, which is in person on May 22nd. There's an upcoming webinar, Streamlining Trading and Investment Processes with Data Standards and Identifiers on the 3rd of June. And another webinar, Mastering Data Lineage for Risk, Compliance, and AI Governance, and that's on the 18th of June. So you can scroll down to the bottom of this page for more information and to sign up right away. Back to today's topic on how to future-proof data management through streamlined and simplified architectures. Our expert speakers today are Jez Davies, Global Head of Data Products at Northern Trust Asset Servicing, Robert Mueller, who's Director, Senior Group Manager, Technology Product Owner at BNY Mellon, and Neil Vernon, Chief Product Officer at Gresham Technologies. I'll ask all the speakers to introduce themselves in just a moment, but first, some information on how you can take part in today's webinar. To the right of the video, you'll see a Slido box for questions and polls, and we're going to be running 2 audience polls during the webinar, so please vote and help us to gauge industry opinion, and I'll remind you when the polls are coming up. If you'd like to ask the experts any questions, we'll be taking questions from the audience throughout the webinar, so please feel free to add yours to the Slido box under the Questions tab. So let me ask our speakers to introduce themselves. Jez, can you start?
Hi, Joy. So I'm Jez Davis. I'm Global Head of Data Products at Northern Trust Asset Servicing. So focusing on data product creation within sort of a data mesh ecosystem.
Excellent. And Rob?
Yeah, Robert Mueller, BNY. I'm the Divisional Data Officer for the conventional trust, structured debt, and loads enablement platforms. Really focusing on the end-to-end data strategy for each of those platforms, including best practices from a data governance and a data quality perspective. Thank you.
Excellent. And of course, your opinions on this webinar are your own.
That's correct. Yes, as with any large company, one has to state any opinion stated by myself today is my own and not a reflection of a position or opinion by BNY. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much. And Neil?
Neil Vernon, Chief Product Officer for Gresham. So I set product strategy across a wide range of products that are involved in data automation, data integrity, data connectivity. We involved in data in a lot of different places. And I can actually say that Gresham's opinions are my opinions, or vice versa. My opinions are Gresham's opinions.
Excellent. Okay, fantastic. So it's going to be a very interesting discussion today because I think many large financial institutions have been dealing with very complex environments when it comes to managing and governing huge volumes of data, which just seems to be increasing, and also from multiple disparate systems. So to solve such issues such as data accessibility, long processing times, lack of scalability, new streamlined and flexible architectures have emerged that can really deploy data to bring greater value to organizations. So in this webinar, we're going to be discussing the benefits of those simplified structures, but also the challenges of implementing them, and then how organizations are overcoming the difficulties of implementation. But before I bring in the experts, I'm going to get the audience to answer the first poll because we want to hear your insights as well. So if we can bring up the first poll, it's really around, the first poll says, has your company felt the need to modernize its data architecture in the past 5 years? And you only have 3 possible answers. One is yes, one's no, and the third one is still considering it. So if everyone can please vote, and while we're waiting for the poll results, let's kick off the discussion with the first question. And Neil, I'm going to put you on the spot, actually, with a very hard-hitting question, which is, what are the key differentiating principles behind streamlined and modern data architectures?
Thank you, Julian. Thank you for that question. So we go into organizations that in many ways don't have streamlined modern data architectures. They have the opposite. So, a typical problem we might face is we cannot find the owner of the data. We need a data feed. Who owns it? And inevitably, we end up talking to IT, which I feel in this world is the wrong people to be talking to. Apologize to the technologists on the call. But it should be the business that owns the data, and it should be owned. And actually, it's not owned typically. There's a little bit here, a little bit there, but who's really responsible? You can never find the person that's responsible. And then you start to look at the quality of that data, and the quality is lacking. It's incomplete, it's inaccurate, it's not timely. It's got this value in system one, and it's got a different value in system two. So there's all sorts of problems. And it's just not built. The older frameworks, the older processes just don't have that quality built in. There are no controls, or there are very few controls. The data lacks quality because of the lack of controls. There are no built-in controls. Where you do find a problem, people sit on it. They don't manage the exception. They don't get it back into the STP flow as quickly as possible. In a world of T+1 and hopefully at some point T0, it's really important to be on top of your data problems and get them managed really, really quickly. There's a lack of governance. Many aspects of the data problem are manual, and there's a lack of automation. And when there's change going on, people consider the data last rather than first. So, those are the opposites, I suppose. So I'm really looking for clear ownership by the business. I'm looking for quality built in, a core part of the framework. I'm looking for controls across the whole life cycle. I'm looking for automated exception management and fixing the problems as quickly as possible. And I'm looking for proper governance in a modern data framework.
Excellent. That's really interesting. And now we're going to get the poll results just to see where everybody is at. And obviously 77% say yes, they have felt the need to modernize data architecture in the past 5 years. 23% are still considering it, but nobody is not considering it. I think, Jez, what do you think about those poll results? Because I would have been surprised if anybody hadn't considered it. Sure.
I would have been amazed if that was the case. Yeah, if nobody was considering. I mean, it is I think Neil touched on some really good points there. I think there's some. I mean, one of the fundamental problems we have as an industry, we all talk about the importance of data and certainly when you think of the importance going forward with AI and the impact that will have and the disruptive nature that will have going forward. It's that lack of trust in the data that people have, and that Neely touched on the kind of the discoverability of the data too as well. So those are the real challenges that people have to address now, because this isn't going to get any better on its own.
But do you think people that are still considering it, do you think that they've not quite missed the boat, but they're definitely behind the curve?
It depends which industry you're in, I guess, to some extent. But I think it would be digging your heels in the sand right now and thinking it will be okay is probably not the best business strategy right now, I'd say.
All right, Rob, I don't know if you want to comment on the poll results, but the other questions, I guess, and like Neil touched on a little bit, Jez touched on it a bit, but what would you say are the biggest drivers around the development of sort of a new modern structure for data?
Yeah, no, listen, I totally echo what Neil and Jez laid in with. My view, particularly for those that are still on the fence, right? I think a number of key drivers that would definitely get them off the fence, right, is obviously the rising volume and complexity of data, the ability to knock down data silos and solve data interoperability. If that doesn't convince you, obviously regulatory demands, right? BCBS 239 and Basel III, there's uplift looking for greater transparency on metadata management, right? Having greater transparency, particularly for a risk and compliance perspective. And if that isn't, obviously your client's looking for a faster time to insights, right? And analytics, right? And I think that's always the big push, is just the drive towards greater analytics and integrated AI capabilities. So I think, modern data architecture, lays the foundation for it.
And I think Neil touched on something quite important. Is that it shouldn't necessarily be a technology-driven endeavor, and that's really key. I think we're seeing a lot of changes now where a lot of organizations, and obviously Neil, your title, it's that data as a product culture. So thinking of it through a different lens now, what is the intrinsic value of the data? The technology solutions we have, a lot of these things are kind of solved problems. We have patterns and things that we can adapt to these. People have been through the pain, and we have solutions. A lot of these things do, but that's the first thing where it's that different mindset of thinking of that the intrinsic value of the data you're actually using.
Excellent. And Neil, do you want to add anything in terms of the drivers that
Yeah, just think about that a little bit more. So clearly, there's been big changes in our industry around the move to T+1, and that's given rise to big cost increases, actually. And a part of that, of course, is the data quality. The data's not ready. It's not real time. In many cases, it's batch. It lags behind the new cycles. So that's one driver. And a really, really important one. Secondly, and we've touched on it. Of course, we've touched on it because it's May 2025, and the webinar wouldn't be complete without talking about AI and ML. So we've talked about it a little bit. And if you put bad data into your AI and ML, well, guess what? It's like everything else. You put bad data in, you get bad data out. It might be hallucinating, but it may be because you've given it the wrong stuff to begin with. So there's that. And I think actually forgetting about T0, T1, forgetting about AI/ML, there's just too many exceptions. There's just things just go wrong too many times, and the things that go wrong are all about the data quality. At some point, the data's gone wrong. Nobody noticed it, and it got too far down the cycle. You failed to settle. You failed to do this. You failed to deliver. There's just too many problems, and so those are the drivers, really, from my perspective.
Excellent. Okay, and then I'm going to ask you as well, but I'm going to ask everyone on the panel, which is really about how are modern data architectures being deployed at financial institutions. So some sort of real world examples of what's happening out there.
I'm finding it a little bit piecemeal, if I'm really honest. It's somewhat siloed. So maybe it's done well in equities, but not done so well in fixed income, or maybe it's done well in FX. So there's a siloed element to it. In many ways, that might be reflective of the fact that this is an increment. It should be an incremental process, and we're still incrementing across. So I see a lot of siloed good, a lot of mediocre, a lot of bad. So I think there's a slow take up across the institution and across institutions, but generally I do actually we see more and more people. As the survey suggested, people are now finally really interested in what I think is a really important topic.
And do you see it being deployed in any specific, like, is there a trend in terms of where it's being deployed?
I fear that part of it is around a response to a problem. So a regulator has come in and said, you've got to fix this. So they've got to fix it. Or there has been a big bang. So it's gone wrong, and there's been a big loss, and we've got to fix it. We must fix it. So I think I fear that it's more that than it is a strategic kind of approach. It's a fix after fail approach.
Rob, I can see you sort of nodding, but do you agree with that? Or and then also again, real world examples, how are these modern architectures being deployed?
Yeah. So no, listen, I totally agree. I think, and that kind of dovetails some of the other questions we had later on in the panel. I'll save that for later. But I think right at BNY, we implemented an enterprise data platform that's essentially governed but with federated ownership, right? I think it's a key thing that Neil talked about is data ownership and providing uplift to that population, right? Data is a strategic product, and you need to treat it as such. I may be biased, but I think that's like the truth, right? Particularly if you're looking for AI outcomes, right? You need to make the proper investment in the policies and the data, and the people and the technology behind it to unlock its value. Specifically for us, we've gone with a hybrid approach, right? Using platform thinking to decouple older systems for legacy architectures. We have an on-prem and a cloud component. We've deployed, APIs and microservices, and we've adopted streaming, platforms like Kafka and things to get at it really. And then at the end, as we're kind of connecting all these disparate systems and then getting them into a governed, architecture, we deployed a data marketplace where then consumers can come in and search for and discovered registered data sets, right? And then subscribe to them to ease consumption on the back end. And I think it takes time, but I think ultimately, using like a hybrid approach kind of helps to incrementally unlock that value, and it's a journey for sure.
Excellent, Jez.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons I moved from being a pure technology role into product was kind of the emergence of data mesh and what Samak Dagani came back in 2018. And I saw for the first time there was actually a solution which really mapped across into the business. And we talked things about like data as a product, as I mentioned previously as well. And it was the first time it really resonated with me as this being a viable solution. So yeah, I think building a data mesh, we're going to see more and more of that. Data fabrics. I think in the future we'll see kind of maybe the kind of the union of them both, or another buzzword will come out which will address something in a similar fashion. But I think that notion of data as a product, where you have, it isn't just data, it's high quality documentation, user guides, videos, training, things that come along with that for the user story to actually understand what this thing is. I think that's really valuable. So it elevates what data is, and we talked earlier about making data understandable and consumable. I think that kind of unlocks a lot of these problems that we have.
Excellent. All right. Well, I'm going to move on to the next poll question. So let's move on to poll question 2, which is, if your organization has modernized its architecture, what drove the decision to do so? And obviously that sort of comes back to the question that we had earlier about what are the drivers. But it'd be interesting to hear from our audience about that. And in this way, you have, I think, 8 different options in terms of what was sort of the top driver. So if people want to vote on that now. And then maybe back to you, Jez, in terms of, and you touch on a little bit there, but what use cases really are coming to the fore that can benefit from modern data architecture?
I think it's thinking about the monetization of the data. So when you think of, I'm going to use the word data products a lot, sorry, but it is really important. The fact that when you're creating these aggregate data products, you're actually creating new things that you didn't really have before because you have access to this data. It's discoverable, and you can kind of piece things together to make new sellable entities for your organization too. I think that's really powerful, and I think that there's a huge amount of value that people will see off the back of that as well, because the fact that it's now so discoverable. The real challenge we have as an industry now is that because a lot of this is locked away in silos with their own sort of controls and mechanisms and ETLs to get a hold of this, and it's undocumented. So it's a mess. It's nearly impossible to try and actually understand this. So having it all searchable and linkable is massively enabling for an organization.
Excellent. And Rob, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, no, I think that a lot of that makes sense. One of the key use cases we're always driving, right, is operational efficiency. So BNY, they're always looking to run the company better, be more for our clients, and it's definitely true in our loans enablement space. They've been, implementing a more modernized data architecture to basically unify a number of disparate systems. So it allows them to centralize and manage their data more efficiently and process it. So as a result, right, they're a little more streamlined, fewer manual interventions, quicker time to market, right, and improve client service. So I think those are some key things, definitely that are, strong, hard benefits of such an approach.
Excellent. All right. Well, let's see what the results are from our poll. So those that have the modernized architecture, they were driven by the decision to do so to provide flexibility and scalability. I think that speaks to what Rob has said. And then also strengthen governance. Those were the top 2. And then improve AI readiness had like no one. So that's quite interesting. Neil, I don't know if you want to comment on the results as you see it.
I mean, that one is strange, isn't it? Because AI requires just lots and lots of data, and you need to have trust in that data. So, I think as Jez mentioned it earlier, it's this lack of trust that's a problem, and we need that trust. So I find that one very, very surprising. Are we sure we put that answer up? Maybe it had fallen off the bottom of the screen for people.
I think it shows that the audience is experienced in using data, right? Because it is that we have I speak to some consultants who are sort of pitching certain solutions, and they will sometimes end with, well, we have a large language model and a chatbot that can help with this, and help with what? I mean, what is it going to be operating on, right? So there's, in some senses, there's a level of naivety across some of the practitioners in the industry of what AI can solve right now. AI can solve a lot of things in the future. I think we're potentially a few years away from that seismic change certainly within the financial industry, until we get a lot of these foundational parts in place. To Neil's point, garbage in, garbage out is very, very real in that sense.
Rob, do you want to add anything? Are you surprised by that, or
Yeah, just
are you surprised by also the top two reasons? I think
I think the flexibility and scalability makes sense, because I think that's kind of like what we're, I've seen a lot of firms are at, right? Strength and governance, I think that just goes hand in hand. I think to almost the Neil's point at the outset, right? Compliance is, getting the job done right, from the get-go, right? And it essentially is a byproduct. I think the AI readiness, I think I kind of echo Jez as well, right? Definitely from financial services, we have much more of a risk-averse sort of profile. But and then the key thing is you really want to ensure that you have, trust in your data if you put it out there. But I think one of the things that, particularly, everyone has, chases the AI sort of mantle, so to speak. To me, it's always, and I kind of, it is echoing, some of the points that prior made, right? Data, strategic product, you need to think about it in terms of like ROI, like what is the use case going to apply to, what's the material outcome, and then how you're going to measure that benefit, right? Not doing data for data's sake. So
excellent. Okay.
Yeah.
I was going to move on to the next question, which is about what would you argue are the most important elements of a modern data architecture for any given use case? And then also maybe I'll tack on, what are the risks associated with not implementing them? Neil, I'll turn to you first.
And I might refer back to the poll, actually, in the sense of, I think the most important element, and it's been mentioned earlier, the volume of data is just growing and growing. And you need scalability, and really serious scalability, because there's just masses and masses of data. And unless you get that scalability right, you will fail. The poll question talked about flexibility. I think of that more as being able to deal with complexity. We like to think that the data architecture should be simple, but they'd be great if they were. But the reality is, we deal with some very complex instruments that are difficult to describe, and the flows that they go through and the changes that they go through in their life cycle are themselves complex. And we have to have an infrastructure that can represent that complexity, that can deal with that complexity, and can deal with the change in that complexity over time. And I'd say, for me, those are the two most important. There's lots of other good things, lots and lots of other good things, but you have to be scalable. You have to deal with complexity.
And Jez, do you have anything that you want to add? Or would those be your top two as well?
I think the complexity segues into, so one of my I have somewhat of a OCD around kind of data modeling and metadata management and naming conventions, and making sure that when I look at something, it has an accurate description, there's no typos and things like that. And these are sort of minor things, but it leads to bigger things. There was the old story of Van Halen, the group used to have in their rider, there would be no brown M&Ms, right? And it seems a small thing, but it meant that if they saw them in the venue, that they'd never hire the venue again, because part of that rider was safety concerns and everything else in there. So when I see this behavior in the modeling, things like that as well, I know it's the tip of an iceberg of things that maybe not being controlled too. So I think that complexity has to be managed somehow. But you need to have that level of control and discipline with your engineering teams and model teams to actually control that too. And that comes down to, having a centralized modeling tool. There's a lot of really cool modeling tools out there now that allow for real-time communication and model sharing and things of that nature as well. And that'll help us. It's never going to be simple, because the industry we work in is pretty messy, unfortunately.
Excellent. All right, we've already got some questions in from the audience, and I was going to pop one in now. And so I'll open it up in terms of who wants to answer it. But the question is, how critical is lineage and supporting metadata to enabling trust in your data products? Does anyone want to touch that one?
It's vital. because it goes back to the trusted point I made at the start there. So, and it's hard. It's a difficult thing to do. There are a few standards that you can use that will help. The problems we have in this industry sometimes is a lot of the approaches we've made previously were somewhat academic in nature, and there is a place for that, and the purity, and that is great, but it has to be consumable to all. So I think sometimes the data lineage parts are some of the more tricky bits to wire in, but they have to be wired in at the start, because trying to wire it in midway through the product ideation and development is very difficult. And you have to know where to end. Do you just need to know where it originated from at a time? Do you need to know exactly the cell and the variance of the cell at that point where it came from? So it's a complex thing, but I think it is absolutely critical to have that wired in.
Excellent.
Yeah, strongly agree. If I look at our business, we part of what we provide is an EDM tooling. So we're taking in feeds from Bloomberg, from Infinity, of a variety of organizations. And there are strict rules about how that data can be used and what are the use cases you can use it in. And if you don't have lineage, if you don't know where that data's come from, if you have no governance there, then you're going to be in breach of contracts, and they'll come after you. You've got to know that lineage. And similarly with AI and ML models, you're pushing data through. Is that data fit for the purpose in which you're trying to use it? You don't know unless you've got lineage.
Okay, excellent. I'm going to move on to the next question, which I had, which is around whether a modern data architecture can easily be established within legacy systems. I think a lot of financial institutions are probably, that's one of their biggest questions. And so I'm going to turn to Rob first. But my other question on the back of that was, what modifications are needed to implement them?
Yeah, like off the bat, right? I think given any sort of like large innovation or architecture, I would say not easily, right? I think the key thing though is to rationalize your current application landscape with, right? What are your core applications? Are in invest or divest mode? Is the data they're creating driving material outcomes? If feeding critical business services, right? For your institution. The answer to those questions is yes, and that's what you should focus your time on. One of the key things you really want to focus on, and it goes back to the scalability piece and interoperability. Leveraging a modern data architecture can help, basically, decouple from your legacy systems, right? So decouple, the older systems are going to lack API compatibility. They're going to be monolithic, not cloud ready, and then don't support real-time processing, right? I think that's a key thing. I think on the flip side, what we're doing at BNY, leveraging that hybrid approach, right, with the on-prem and cloud, component, you can incrementally modernize. You can use data virtualization techniques, right, to base the architecture, and then finally, like using containers and orchestration logic, things like Kubernetes to help like power your AI engines, things like that. Or start. But I think it always comes to just some of the classic things. You always just take a nice planned approach and just rationalize your architecture before you begin the journey.
Yeah, I think that's spot on, Rob. I remember I read a book years ago by Stefan Murrers, the CTO at Credit Suisse, a book called Managed Evolution, and he described it as being fossilized to change these systems. I really like that thing because they become so intractably complex. Yeah. And there's no documentation, so it's guesswork as to how these things actually work together and how they operate. And can I switch this off? Yes or no? It's an absolute guesswork. So you spend so much time, and at the end of it, you end up with a similar solution to what you had before, with all the same inherent problems.
Mm-hmm. Neil, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'm a real fan of standards. Things like ISO 20022. Dangerous sending the audience to sleep, but they're really important. They impose structure, they impose quality, they impose a certain degree of completeness and accuracy. And legacy platforms just can't deal with that. They can't take in those. It frustrates me. Actually, we make a business out of mapping from ISO 20022 to older standards, less complete standards. It's great that we've got a business line there. It's awful that we take something that's been really well thought through, really well designed, and turn it into something that was less well thought through, less well designed, more capable in batch than real-time situations. So I do think, that we do need to get rid of this legacy. Because if we don't, then we'll be forever mapping from good to bad. We'll forever be going from perfect to a long, long way from perfect.
You have a kindred spirits in those ISO standards, Neil.
I have to say I've covered ISO for a very long time, especially the 2002. There's another question in terms of building your own platforms, and maybe this is for Jez or Rob. Did you build your own platforms internally, or were you able to buy a software to manage the core of your data platform?
I think build. I mean, there are use cases for building internally, but I think they're becoming more and more difficult to justify with what we're seeing with this essentially just the cost efficiencies of the cloud. And I think one thing I'd stress is that it's data is cheap to store on the cloud, but it isn't free. Storing a file in an S3 bucket is relatively inexpensive. Storing a few million of them of different sizes can actually get pretty big quite quickly. So there are risks inherent in using the cloud because of the fact you can spin up bills, which you could control internally somewhat better. So sometimes there is a cost benefit there as well. But I'm really against the notion of having these kind of shadow bills internally where people are making their own estates, because fundamentally they're not baked into the strategic direction, which for most of our organization now is this cloud first mentality. The silos become, because they're not really plugged into that ecosystem, it's much harder to communicate with. You can share internal to cloud, you can vice versa, but it becomes a bit more of a pain. So but as all these things, if there is, it has to be through the lens of how much value is in there. Using the cloud for the cloud's sake will not improve your business in any way, shape, or form. So sometimes it is pragmatic to use internal stack.
Yeah, I echo that as well. I think the key thing is if they're going to do it, basically adhere to a centrally governed model. What you don't want to happen is someone say go rogue, but like they build like their own silo, and then they're essentially curating the same data sets as other areas in the bank,
Yeah.
and right at the end of the day they don't match, right? And that's a problem, right? So I think so no, I definitely agree. You need to have a centralized approach and rationalize it for sure.
And I think that some of the dangers with AI these days now is that anyone can become a developer now, and it is amazing how clever these things are, how with a few prompts you can produce something which is phenomenal. So sometimes there's a tendency to use that and deploy that and to work with it because it looks like it works, but that is inherently risky as well, right? Because it is writing the code is sometimes the easy part of what we do as an industry. It's everything that surrounds that is the complex in terms of support and maintenance and who wakes up at 4 a.m. to look after this thing.
And Neil, do you want to add anything? Or
Well, I'm a vendor, of course. I come from a vendor organization, so no surprise. You should buy, not build. But why would you rob yourself of that of the cost savings of commoditization? And to Jesse's point, we invest lots and lots in testing, in refinements, in making sure we've got the right support organization, in making sure that we really understand the various processes are going across our entire customer base, so that we're well placed to fit in it across any architecture. Whereas if you build, I fear it'll be very narrow. You'll end up working in that one use case. It possibly won't be as scalable. It probably won't take on board those standards. And you'll have an ongoing cost, a real big ongoing cost that will cost you far, far more than going with a vendor solution.
Yeah. And sometimes it feels like the path of least resistance. But it's so, I've been doing this like most of the people on the panel here for a number of years. And I still think of myself as credible as an engineer. I still write code, but I see what people can do these days, and how easy it is to do some of these solutions using the cloud and some of the things that are available on the cloud, which you can't do internally. Things like change data capture and sort of time travel and some of these databases, which are kind of natively available in the cloud. That stuff's really hard. Like we had to code that ourselves historically, and it's very difficult to do that. So unless you're using a natively enabled, because the cloud isn't just a data store, it is all the associated services that enable you to have all these wonderful features. Writing that yourself internally, that's going to be a challenge, and it's it's a self-defeating prophecy at that point, because you don't, what is the underlying business value of doing that, other than you've become better at writing Python?
Mm. And I guess there could be a talent issue there as well. So my next question was really around the broader challenges. So that could be the talent uh, angle, but there's a question from the audience, which is really around cultural resistance to change. I'm wondering, like, were those some of the sort of broader challenges that you faced when you were trying to implement this new, modern data architecture? Rob?
No, yeah, like, see, nodding. Yeah. So, like, listen, I think with any technical innovation or advancement, right, a lot of the classic challenges are always going to apply, right? I think one, like a management perspective, they want to know what's the payoff, right? So, what is the business case? What's the cost up front? And then when are you going to recoup that from like from a ROI perspective? I think from a legacy technical debt perspective, right? I kind of just hit on that as well. Like if you allow people to build these things, you're basically creating a problem that's to be solved tomorrow, right?
Yeah.
Another issue. I think at the outset, I think Neil kind of hit it as well. Which was really data ownership is another key one as well. Like you want to have strong data governance, data management practices because you have clear ownership of your data. And I think, into that specific question, I think from the cultural resistance to change as well. I think really in that, you need to have an outcome, driven, high performance culture type of mindset, right? Where you're driving business cases and value, right? Like not doing data for data's sake. And I think, and I think actually, Joy, you kind of led in with that as well, which was really around, right? People don't think about that, that resistance to change. And also, what are these skills from both a technology and people perspective, right? From engineering and cloud perspective, you need to have in the seats, right, to drive it forward. I think are kind of things that you really need to take consideration.
Excellent. And Neil, what have you seen in sort of your ability to see across different financial institutions? What were the broader challenges that you've come across?
I think I started with it, and actually, Rob echoed it. Just this ownership of data, which I think we're all saying, and probably everybody on the call knows, is really, really important. Very few of us want a career in owning data. That's not what we want. That's not what we've aspired to. Sadly, people haven't. But it is really important. So I think the question talked about the cultural impedances, and that's, we do have that problem that it's not seen as being sufficiently important. We've talked about how key getting the data right is, getting it real time, dealing with the scale of that, but it's not seen as being where people want their careers to be. So I think there's that problem.
Yeah.
I also,
Sorry,
go for it, Jess.
No, I think you nailed it, Neil. I think one thing we always have to consider is that we are, in any organization, we deal with egos, and people have their own fiefdoms and domains, and sometimes, depending on who they are, they're not keen on people lifting the lid and seeing the processes they have that have been running for years, right? So I think sometimes people are quite reactionary to it, and it feels like a challenge to some people. You're kind of challenging what they're doing because they've always done this. So why should I change it? How do you know my industry better? How do you come in and tell me what to do? The way that I found to really demonstrate that is to show demonstrable value of what the change will do and how it can enable them to do their job better. So you bring them along with you rather than a direct challenge to say, we're getting rid of this entire real estate. So you kind of incentivizing them to adapt and learn. And they do or they don't, and maybe they need to move into different roles. You can get the right people in place as well if they are being particularly challenging.
Neil, did you want to just make the point you were going to make before, or?
It's fine. I've forgotten the point. If I'm
All right. I'm sorry.
okay.
I thought you could come in. All right. Yeah. I think I just want to say again that we're taking questions for the audience. So if you have any questions, please put them in Slido, which is right to the right of your screen. And then my next question. I think we've just got something in from Slido actually. Where do you stand on data meshes and data fabrics? Does anyone want to take that?
So I like data mesh. I think it's a great.
Okay, so sorry to interrupt, Jez, but
Yeah.
maybe you could explain the difference first for people that aren't au fait with it.
So a data mesh is odd because data mesh is kind of this socio-technical solution that was proposed. So it is although I've been pitched a few times with vendors saying we have a data mesh solution, there's no such thing as a data mesh product you can buy. And something. So data mesh, it has 4 pillars. The first is data domain orientation. So your lines of business and your data domains are aligned, and you're given. I think Neil or Rob touched on this earlier. It's given a particular owner, and that owner is kind of defined the product, and you have data as a product. One of the real hurdles we have is around governance can become a hindrance to innovation. Governance needs to exist, but it can become a centralized governance body. So it has a federated governance model where individual domains define their own sort of governance models, and that links into a central standard. And then the final part then is on self-serve. It allows you can self-serve, releasing your models, discovering the models, and all that sort of accountability on top of that as well. Data fabric, I will hand over to Neil and Rob because I've forgotten, so I will have see what they say.
My experience of data fabric is of failed projects after failed projects. And I think that's why we're probably all struggling, because actually every organization that I've gone into that's had some kind of data fabric, actually, and I think it comes back to things we've been talking about before, which is the data fabric projects were all owned by IT. They weren't owned by the business.
Yeah.
And maybe it wasn't a solution looking for a problem, because we know that there really are lots and lots of data problems. But because it wasn't driven by the business, it didn't solve the business problem. So, we go into quite a few sites where there is some kind of data fabric there, but nobody wants to use it. It hasn't got the data isn't as timely as you would want. Nobody trusts the data. Actually, we talk about trust a lot. Nobody trusts the data in there. Is it timely? Is it stale? And so, for me, data fabric is a buzzword for a kind of being led by the architects, the technical architects in the financial organizations, rather than being led by the business.
Yeah.
The solving a problem.
Yeah, I was going to say. I think that makes sense. It's sort of it's driven like the tail wagging the dog a bit, right? Like being more of a business focus and streamlining things. It was sort of, I'll say, for lack of a term, band-aids to kind of bridge a lot of legacy architecture, and that doesn't have sort of like built into the central governance mechanism. So I think I agree with that. Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. And then the next question is around, how do you see sort of development of modern data architecture over let's say, the next 5 years, which I have to say is perhaps a bit of a long timeline. But Rob, what do you think?
Yeah, I just think I feel, and this kind of echoes some of what Jess said before, just some of the advancements and innovations in the space. I think 5 years is a long way off, right? I think it's a little faster. I think you look people try to lean into more increased adoption of AI and cloud native architecture. I think really, and I'm also biased as well, having worked on data products before, but the productization of data, right? And really driving a strategic product. And then, hopefully, particularly from a metadata perspective on ingestion and some of these tools, stronger, data governance out of the box, right? Just more automated data. That's like a key thing as well.
Excellent. Jez?
So one of the really cool things I've seen, and we're using, is data contracts. So data contracts are, for those not familiar with it, it's like a schema on steroids. So it defines the shape of your models, but also kind of the intent, the quality of rules, the expectations, SLAs, examples. It's a growing ecosystem, and it's kind of you can search a data contract, and there's kind of a Git repo for these, and that allows you to then as part of, so you have a data contract for the source, you have a data contract for the consumer. You can wire in sort of vendor products such as Great Expectations or Soda, which actually controls some of this sort of the quality and rule checking and lineage expectations as well. So there's some really cool things happening in that space. So I think data contracts and the evolution of those will continue. But also I think what we'll see more of is around, it's one thing to have a data contract, but you need to have kind of real-time observability to track whether or not it's being adhered to, with alerting and dashboards and kind of AI in the future with sort of automated enforcement and changes. That's kind of this utopian world where things just magically fix themselves, but who knows what'll happen over the next 5 years.
And Neil, do you want to chip in
Yeah, so
your vision?
Jesse's Brave New World is all well and good, and ways great. Fill your boots.
Yeah.
But for me, it would be more basic than that. Maybe it's more what would I like to see in the next 5 years. So I would like to see that ownership. I would like to see data being checked for quality, checked for completeness, checked for accuracy, checked for timeliness at every point on its journey, that we gate the data into the system so that we don't let bad data in, and we don't allow anything to happen to it to cause it to go wrong, and it's owned at every point in its life, and we deal with that complexity across all of the financial products, whether whatever you're trading, we know that there's quality there. That's what I'd like to see. Phil,
that's where I was going to say that's where I was going to jump in. Like, one of my roles as a divisional data officer is data quality, right, of that pipeline, and what we're looking to do with more modern data architecture is actually shifting left. A lot of the legacy data quality rules are at the end of a pipeline, and because of the legacy monolithic architecture, that's where you can place them. With the cloud native architectures, it allows you to basically perform that validation on ingestion, and then you can close that feedback loop by sending right back, return to sender, so to speak. Have dashboards that basically expose that to the source systems, i.e., the data owners producing it, and saying, "Hey, we found something. You need to correct it at source," as opposed to trying to sew it together in the back end of a process. So no, definitely something near and dear to my heart.
Excellent. All right. Well, it's such a shame because it's been such an interesting conversation, but I'm afraid we only have maybe a couple of minutes left. So I was going to say, I don't think we have any more questions that we haven't addressed so far. Oh, maybe there's a new one coming in. Yeah, which sort of explains different things. But anyways, I think I'm just going to have to move to the last question that I have, which is a real shame. But obviously, any of the questions that come through, we can answer also offline later. So the last question for our experts is, what single piece of advice would you give any counterpart about modernizing their data architecture? That's a tough one. I'll start with Rob.
Yeah, I don't know. I think the biggest thing is, from the outset, understand your business and their goals and your data strategy. And I think I'm going to echo kind of a number of things that Neil and Jess said at the outset, right? Like, my view is treat data like a strategic product and make sure you get the right people and technology around it to unlock its value. I think that's sort of like my parting advice.
Excellent. And Jess?
Yeah, I think that's spot on, Rob. I think it's starting with the value. Don't start with the tooling. Not everything needs to change, and you need to start small, because it's kind of that is the what do they call it? The two-way door approach. Is that when you don't want to have a one-way door, you can't come back in. You want to experiment and try something else, you can come back in and do that. So start small, but make sure you can actually, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So you need to make sure that there's an implied value in what you're doing.
All right. Thank you. And Neil, last word.
I think we've said it really, but treat data as a product, have a roadmap for that product, have a roadmap for your data, and just keep on improving it incrementally.
Perfect. All right. Well, thanks so much to Neil, Rob, and Jez for your insights. And also many thanks to our sponsor, Gresham Technologies. Another reminder of upcoming events that you can sign up for. Obviously, on May 22nd, it's an in-person event in London, which is the AI and Capital Markets Summit. On the 3rd of June, we have a webinar, Streamlining Trading and Investment Processes with Data Standards and Identifiers. And then on the 18th of June, another webinar, which is Mastering Data Lineage for Risk, Compliance, and AI Governance. So again, a huge final thank you to our impressive speakers. Finally, please complete our feedback form, as we're always keen to hear your views and improve our products. And thanks so much for joining us for this informative webinar on how to simplify and modernize data architecture to unleash data value and innovation. Thank you so much.
Very much.